Hi, everyone. Welcome to the December 10th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. This week on the podcast, we're going to talk about Cigar Mile Day, that being the focus of this past weekend, the last Grade 1 race that was run in New York this year. There'll be a couple more Grade 1 races at the very end of the year in California, but this is really the cutoff point for top racing that really has bearing on the Eclipse Awards. And we did get some resolution there as Maximum Security was the winner of the Cigar Mile. We'll talk about that in greater depth, as well as the other stakes action from Aqueduct on Saturday, as in the surrounding days last week. We'll also touch upon some two-year-old racing that took place both at Aqueduct and Los Alamitos, where they ran the Los Alamitos Futurity and the Grade 1 Starlet. We'll talk about a big speed figure from Laurel, and we'll wrap up the podcast by talking about the claiming championship card from Gulfstream. I'm David Aragona, your host, and Craig Milkowski, my co-host. How are you doing this week? And did you enjoy Cigar Mile Day? I think we got a lot of resolution in terms of that three-year-old picture.
We did. I mean, I think that one's pretty much an open and shut case now. I thought it was a lot of fun racing this weekend. I enjoyed watching Saturday. Admittedly, I didn't watch or play any at all on Sunday, but after spending about 10 hours doing it on Saturday, I think I had enough. So really enjoyed Saturday, and probably the last really big day we're going to have till after Christmas with Malibu Day. So it was a kind of a fun way to go out.
Yeah, went out to Aqueduct on Saturday, got to see Maximum Security live for the first time. Wasn't too cold of a day, which was always good at Aqueduct, and just cool to see a performance like that in person. Let's start with that race, the Cigar Mile. Obviously, that's the biggest speed figure of the week. I think that's one of the biggest speed figures that's been earned by any three-year-old this year. The 131 TimeformUS speed figure that Maximum Security received for this race. I was really impressed by this performance. We talked about it on the TimeformUS forecast last week, how versatile this horse can be, but how he was probably going to get sent from the inside, given that Spun to Run, his main pace rival, was drawn just directly to his outside. And it basically turned into the match race that we thought would develop. Spun to Run looked like he was going easier on the turn, but once they got into the stretch, he just couldn't go with Maximum Security.
Yeah, Maximum Security, I think he's just a really good horse, obviously. I mean, to state what everybody can see now. But, you know, for a lot of reasons, he hasn't been given his due by many people, including myself for a while. But given his last few, it's just hard to knock him. He's a really fast horse. He faced challenge from, let's face it, a horse that won the Breeders' Cup race here. So this was no chump change he was beating. They went at it right from the wire. They did it right from the bell. They did it going fast. The opening quarter pace figure for this race was a crazy 150, and they still ran 1-2. Now, some of that's the competition, as we alluded to on the forecast. It looked like basically a match race on paper. It was run like one, and that's how it turned out. But I thought that the top two just ran really well, and the winner was the best horse. That 131 is the biggest figure we've seen since the summer, and I think it was well-deserved.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, the great thing about Maximum Security is that he's just so versatile. And I mean, he can achieve this high performance going a flat mile, but he's also able to go 7 furlongs, 1 1/8, 1 1/4. And I think it makes a lot of sense that they're going to target a race like the Pegasus World Cup next, because he hasn't been over raced this year by any stretch. So I think they can justify keeping him in training for a little bit longer over the winter. And given the direction that he's moving in now, just achieving his best TimeformUS speed figure yet, looking forward to what can come from him next year, because it's always seems like these horses start being capable of competing against the older horses towards the end of their three-year-old seasons. They often go on to achieve much better things as four-year-olds. So it's great to see that maturity happening now. Spun to Run, he achieved the same speed figure that he ran in his prior start, the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. So that form really lines up. As for the others, True Timber ran fine, his typical type of race. Looking at bikinis, I thought he ran pretty well to be fourth in this spot. He was really fired up prior to the race, was really on his toes in the paddock. And he showed that on the racetrack. He's another three-year-old that could continue stepping forward next year, as the three-year-olds just kind of dominated this race and looked like that might be the case going in. That's how it turned out.
Yeah, it did. And I'm excited as a speed figure guy just to see what Maximum Security can do. I mean, we were spoiled for a few years with horses like Gunrunner and California Chrome and Aragona putting up big numbers, even hitting the 140 mark. So I haven't seen much of that this year, but Maximum Security gives the impression that he's a horse that's definitely capable of even better than what we saw on Saturday.
Now, I do think we should discuss, especially as we transition into the next two races we're going to talk about, the Remsen and the Demoiselle. In the TimeformUS PPs, this track is color-coded as bright red, indicating that it was the most speed favoring that we can rate a track on Cigar Mile Day. How did you feel about that? There were a lot of front-running winners, so I'm not really surprised to see that. But I thought it was sort of situational more than a really intense track bias situation.
Yeah, I think the front was definitely the place you wanted to be. I think it was an advantage. Maybe a pink color code would be better than a red here because I don't think it was quite as strong. The pace probably played a part in some of them and clear, easy leads. We're going to talk about Spice Perfection. But for the record, races like the Spice Perfection Go for Wand race, they're not counted nearly as much when the pace is that slow. The same if the pace is super fast. So I don't have a huge problem with the designation. Like I said, myself and my personal notes, I'm going to make it more of a pink kind of track.
Yeah, and just speaking from experience watching Aqueduct a lot over the past few weeks, it was the kind of track that I think we've become accustomed to at Aqueduct, where it's been a little bit hard to make up ground on the dirt. You see some large margins between horses at the wires of these races. The kickback can be detrimental to some horses trying to run through it, especially from way back in the pack. So I thought it was pretty consistent with the Aqueduct track that we've been seeing lately. And I think a lot of that red characterization is owing to the result of the Remsen, which we'll talk about next, which was won by 8-1 shot. Shotsky. Good call by you on the TimeformUS forecast last week. This horse, though, he really ran his race. I mean, that 113 TimeformUS speed figure, that's among the best that we've seen by a 2-year-old, especially in a route race. And the pace of this race, it's not color-coded blue as being slow. It definitely was on the moderate side, though. And I did think the runner-up, Aja Weed, did take a really good run at this horse in the stretch and probably ran. He might be the one you want to follow out of this race because he was the only horse that was really making up ground at the end.
Yeah, and he was really making up ground. He got a 110 as compared to the 113 for the winner. But as you said, Shotsky, as good as he ran, he was getting very late. I mean, if that race was another 30 yards, he's probably getting beat. But I was impressed with the top two. Even the third place horse I thought ran pretty well given the circumstances. One thing I do want to say is I wouldn't put a lot of stock in ground loss on this track because it seemed like horses who were running wide, as long as they were in the clear, ran just fine. I don't really think losing ground was a big deal on this surface. Maybe that has something to do with the kickback that we saw that's been a little stronger this year than we've seen in the past. But I thought this was a solid Remsen Stakes. It's right up there with years of past. I think Catholic Boy ran a little faster. The horse who, I forget the horse's name, who won last year, wound up dropping off the 3-year-old trail early due to injury, ran a little bit slower. So it was a solid Remsen, and the top two definitely looked pretty promising.
Yeah, I saw some people trying to justify that it was an inside speed bias at Aqueduct on Saturday, especially at the end of the day, because you had 3 front-running winners in a row that kind of rode the rail. You've got to look at more than just the winners in these situations, though. And throughout the day, and especially in these races with some of the second and third place finishers and fourth place finishers, horses rallying outside actually did pretty well, and sometimes better than they were expected to do. So it was a lot fairer than I think that just looking at the winners might indicate. But I agree with everything you said about the top 3 finishers. There were some no-shows in this race. Alpha 66, who I think ended up going off the favorite, just never got involved. He was farther back than expected in the early going. Forza Dioro, the other horse that took money, just never seemed like he was really handling the course, and he dropped out pretty early. So not the toughest Remsen in the world, but it was a respectably fast race, and I'm looking forward to see what the top 2 do in the future. Moving on to the Demoiselle, run over the same distance. Pretty similar situation played out, except to a more extreme degree, as it seemed like heading into the first turn, nobody wanted the lead. I mean, Critical Value under Irad Ortiz broke on top and looked like he could have the front to himself, but he wanted no part of it as he wrangled that horse back and was just looking for somebody to pass him in the first eighth of a mile. And Junior Alvarado, who was breaking from post 10 on Lake Avenue and on paper, looked like he had a really difficult task getting to the lead. And it was as if he came out of the gate thinking, all right, well, I'm going to look to the left and see if anybody else wants to go because I know it's going to be tough for myself to make the lead. And then it didn't turn out to be that tough because nobody else went, and he just allowed Lake Avenue to run up to the front. The fractions were pretty moderate to slow, and she just dominated up front.
She did. It was a fairly impressive effort, I thought. You'd like to give a little extra credit for winning from the 10 post, which is normally very tough to do at Aqueduct. But I agree with you. I don't really think it played a part in here because everybody else took back. She might as well broke from the 3-hole the way the race ran. But I don't want to take away from her performance. She did set a clear lead on a very moderate pace. If you compare it to the Remsen, it was even slower than that one, which we've already characterized as moderate. It wasn't enough to get the blue fractions, but when you give a good filly like this a clear and doing it comfortably, they're always going to be tough to catch. 107 TimeformUS speed figure, which is her career best. It's better than anyone else had run in here. So maybe she's winning anyway. It's a very good chance she was just the best filly in here. It can be a little frustrating to watch, as I noted on Twitter, but I don't want to take too much away from the winner because of how the others rode the race.
Yeah, I think Lake Avenue is a legitimately good horse. I mean, she's bred to be a top runner. She's by Tapit out of the Grade 1 winning dam 7th Street. So it's not going to be no surprise when she turns out to be among the best of this crop. I do want to give some credit to May Dean, the second place finisher. Rewatching the race, she actually broke fine, but when Critical Value broke on top of the field and crossed over heading into the first turn, she really affected a bunch of runners to the inside of her. There was sort of a chain reaction as horses got shuffled back, including Alondra, who ended up all the way back in second to last early, even though she broke a lot better than that. May Dean didn't have a ton of trouble, but she was shuffled back early in the race, and she was running on best of all at the end, and just feels like a horse to me that's going to have no problems with distance. She just needs a little pace to close into, but she might be every bit as good as Lake Avenue.
Yeah, no doubt. I thought both of the top two ran well. Beyond that, the third place finisher got the same speed figure as the runner-up, Maydeen, a 102. But I wasn't as impressed with her. I thought she had a good, easy trip. So nothing too special there. The top two do interest me, and I look forward to where they show up next in the after the new year, I would assume.
There wasn't nearly as much drama in the Grade 3 Gopher Wand, although the tote board didn't necessarily reflect that because Spice Perfection, who I thought was going to be about 1-2, ended up going off at 7-5 in this race and winning pretty easily. I mean, the margin was only 2 1/4 lengths, but the result never really looked in doubt. As I mean, we talked about it on the forecast last week. There was that no speed scenario by the pace projector where Spice Perfection just looked like she had the lead to herself. And you see all those fractions with those blue color codings. I mean, there was just no pace competition for her. And she got into the stretch, had plenty of horse left, and just ran away from these. They're just not in her league.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, we have no speed labels, and then there's this. I don't even know what to call this. The Spice Perfection has a 64 opening quarter for a pace figure, which is, something you see in the maiden 2,500 claimer at Turf Paradise. So I'm not sure what was going on here. I know none of the other horses have early speed on paper, but surely they could have went this fast if asked a little bit. And one thing to keep in mind, I actually broke this race out for pace. And that was by a full 12 points just to get it up 10 for the winner, 107. I'm actually going to write an article this week kind of detailing this race and just explaining why we break races out and what happens when you don't. Like, had I not broken this out, not only does it affect this race where, for example, the winner would have gotten a 98 speed figure, but it would also inflate the other races at similar distances. So, for example, by including this one, it would have boosted Maximum Security's race and the others like 4 or 5 points, I think it was. So it just seemed like the right call to cut it out. I don't really see much utility in rating this race a 98. If you're going to do that, you might as well just leave it blank because it has no meaning whatsoever. So, don't think you can make a whole lot out of this race anyway. When I handicap these horses going forward, I'm not going to put a lot of stock in the number here or the result or where they finished. I'm going to look at other races for, how I rate these horses.
Yeah, I mean, it was the quintessential merry-go-round race because you look at the charts and they're just running 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the order they finished all the way around the racetrack. So I agree. The others, they didn't really have a chance to close, but they also probably weren't good enough to close. And I agree with everything you said about the pace, about the speed figures for this race, because since they ran around the track in just this one mass, this blob of slow-moving horses, the entire field would have been dragged down if we created a lower speed figure for the winner. And I think it makes sense for all the runners in the race to inflate it a little bit because of breaking it out for pace. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say about this race. Let's talk about a couple of the turf races from Saturday at Aqueduct, a few of the last turf races that were run this season in New York. Both stakes events, the 6 furlong autumn days for the fillies and mares, went pretty early on the card. And Saratoga Treasure, a New York bred, she was a visually impressive winner of this race, just sort of looped the field and ran away to an easy victory. I think this race, though, was more notable for some of the no-shows than the performance of the winner, because a lot of horses that were expected to do well, like Favorite Fire Key, just didn't show up.
Yeah, this was a really bizarre race, especially when you look at it from a pace figure perspective. The opening quarter was, it was acceptable. There was a 119 with Booze and Broadway Run right up on the front end. And then for some reason to the half mile, the race just really slowed down to a 98 TimeformUS pace figure. And it just seemed like that allowed the horses from the back to get momentum and get into the race without really having to do any work. And when it came time to do the real running, I mean, you're not going to outfinish a closer when they're right next to you and haven't done anything early in the race. So I thought it was a really weird pace dynamic race. We have the half mile and the 5 furlong coated in blue as being slow after, like I said, a respectable opening quarter. So not sure what to make of this race, but it was a good effort by Saratoga Treasure. She got a 112 TimeformUS speed figure. But as you say, some of the others, Fire Key, Broadway Run, they just didn't show up at all here.
Yeah, this is where race watching can get a little difficult, because I think that and I heard a lot of people saying this, that Saratoga Treasure was much the best because she made this mid-race move that is almost always detrimental to horses making those types of moves. And, you never want to be making a premature move in a race like this. Yet at the same time, when you look at the TimeformUS pace figure lines, her pace figure line is the only one that makes sense because it's the only one that's kind of moving in a straight line, whereas all the others took a dip in the second quarter, as you were mentioning. They really slowed down, then they tried to speed up again late. Saratoga Treasure is kind of the only horse that ran a normal race, even though the run she made didn't fit how the others rode the race. So, I mean, I don't think that mid-race move took a lot out of Saratoga Treasure because she still finished with the same energy all the others did. She just sort of had a tactical advantage by making the move at the slowest point in the race. And I talk about that because I want to point out the trip of the third place finisher, Roseflower, who just got in a ton of trouble because she probably had the horse to move at the same time that Saratoga Treasure did, but she was down inside. Joel Rosario was trying to do what he does best by saving ground on the turf. Sometimes it works out for him. Pretty often it works out for him. But sometimes when you take those chances, it's just going to backfire in your face. And that's what happened with Roseflower. She just had no room to go around the 3/8 pole to the quarter pole, still had no room in the stretch. She actually finished up pretty well to get third in this race. Whether she would have won with a clean trip, who knows? It's hard to say a horse would have made up 3.5 lengths, but she might have had that much trouble.
Yeah, it was just a bizarre race, as you say, and it's a good point about Joel Rosario. It can definitely happen when the pace slows down. If you anticipate the pace is going to be quicker, and he had no reason not to, given that opening quarter mile, you can often get stuffed like that when the field just slows down and you kind of have nowhere to go and get shuffled out of it. So I thought she ran a good effort given the circumstances. She just really had no shot.
Rides also made the difference in the other turf race from Aqueduct on Saturday, as Feel Glorious got just a great, perfect journey from Junior Alvarado, who saved ground every step of the way. Things really broke in his favor in the stretch as the rail opened up. He hit that gap in the turf course at just the right time when she was able to duck into there and get inside of the front runner and go on to victory. But the difference between the two Christophe Clement fillies was really ground loss, as Feel Glorious beat her stablemate Sorrentina Lemon by 3/4 of a length. Sorrentina Lemon probably covered more than 3/4 of a length of extra ground, though.
Yeah, she did. And the winner got a 112, the runner-up a 111. And just to be clear, these are pretty tough speed figures to make. This was the only turf race on the day on this course. I think the other was on the other course. If not, it was a sprint anyway. So you're kind of using the projection method. You got lately raced 3-year-olds. So they're really not going to take a big jump. They did, it was a career best for the top two, which is something I kind of build in because, you expect horses to get faster as they get older to a point. Obviously, these are young 3-year-olds, but, you're never going to see a race like this unless a horse wins off by 10, jump from a 109 to a 119. So it's almost like you have a preordained speed figure before the race. It can only be so high based on the horses in it and what they've run on the past when there's no other races to go by. So I didn't really have a whole lot to say about this race, so I did want to kind of explain that part of it.
And the turf courses can get pretty difficult to judge when you get late into these turf seasons and some precipitation has occurred. The tracks aren't drying out as quickly because there's not as much sunlight. So a lot of the turf results that we saw over the past week at Aqueduct were a little bit wacky and quirky. And I think this race just kind of falls in line with that. Even though two favorites won the race, what you were saying about the times of this race, it's just hard to get a gauge on them. I want to just briefly touch upon some of the maiden winners from Saturday. I know our friend Andy Serling was talking about how there's this history of 2-year-old maiden winners on Cigar Mile Day going on to win Grade 1 races. Don't know if we've seen future Grade 1 races in this year's card. I mean, there were some nice-looking ones, though. Cost Basis won the first race on the card. Moon Over Miami won the 5th race, both of those going a mile with almost identical final times and similar race shapes. I thought they both looked good. I mean, did anything stand out to you?
No, I mean, they looked okay. Cost Basis got 100 speed figure, Moon Over Miami and 99. That's nothing special, but, with 2-year-olds, you just don't know. They can get better in a hurry. They both certainly look good visually, so it wouldn't surprise me if these horses turned out to be good, but at this point, nothing I'm putting in my stable mail or anything like that.
I feel the same way about that. I liked the way that Moon Over Miami did it. I thought that might have been the weaker race, though. Farmington Road was one of the few horses that made a big run from the back of the pack all day, and he did that behind Moon Over Miami in the 5th race. So maybe they're 2 to watch, but they do have to run faster in the future. We'll wrap up the Aqueduct discussion with talking about the 2 stakes that were contested on Sunday's card, both over 6 furlongs and both earning exactly the same final times as they both went in 1:11.91 seconds. Happy Farm won the Grade 3 fall high weight. I think this was the 3rd attempt to run this race. It had been canceled twice before. It seems like every time they redrew this race, they lost a major contender. They still had the big favorite, though, Recruiting Ready in the field. And Recruiting Ready just didn't really show up with his best effort this day.
He didn't, and I am a guy that believes in weight a little bit, and I have to think the 132 he carried had a bit of an effect on him. He's also a horse that has to have the lead for the most part. He's won from just off the pace a couple times in his career against lesser competition, but not really in stakes. And once he didn't make the lead, even at 2 to 5, I really didn't think he was going to win this race. Happy Farm looked good. He's, been on fire since being claimed for Jason Service. He got a 117 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, which, again, it doesn't sound great, but keep in mind they were carrying more than they normally will. He was carrying 125, so 7 pounds less than the favorite, but that's still more weight than he's going to carry in a typical stakes race. And if you use that setting in our past performances, say if he ran back with a more typical 119, that figure would be 3 points higher. Recruiting Ready, who carried 132, if he carried 120 next time, that would show up as a 120 instead of a 114. So this is probably one of the few times all year that you can actually pay a lot of attention to weight and how it affects speed figures.
And when you go in TimeformUS PPs, you can actually toggle on or off whether you want to view the weight or not. And I always keep it on because I think it's really fascinating to see how weight might affect a horse's speed figures. For instance, when I was handicapping this fall high weight, Recruiting Ready, when you just look at the raw speed figures, had a huge advantage over this field, but it really did come down based on that 7-point difference that you talked about between him and Happy Farm, whereas he didn't appear to have the huge TimeformUS speed figure edge even coming into the race because of that weight disadvantage that he was placed at in this handicap. So it's something that you might want to look at if you're using the TimeformUS PPs. In the Garland of Roses earlier on the card, Pause for the Cause, as I said, she ran the exact same final time as Happy Farm, not carrying quite as much weight. She also wasn't facing nearly as tough competition as she was a favorite in this race, probably not as strong of a favorite as some of us thought she would be, but she just got to the front, and that was really all she wrote because she's a horse that when she gets to the lead, she's pretty hard to pass.
Yeah, she was. She got a 114 for the win after a couple 120s in her last couple wins. So not quite as impressive from a clock standpoint, but she did what she had to do. She won easy. She never looked like she was going to get even approached, let alone beat. I mean, she was just doing it free and easy. So I'm not going to knock her because of the 114. She's just turned into a really good filly right now.
Let's move on to Los Alamitos and talk about some more of that 2-year-old racing. They ran the Los Alamitos Futurity, which is a Grade 2 now, as well as the Grade 1 Starlet for the fillies. Let's begin with the Colts and Geldings. Just a 4-horse field in the Los Alamitos Futurity. It was run over a good sealed track at Los Alamitos, so obviously horses needed to handle the surface to do well in these races. The top two in this race definitely did, 1,000 Words and Anno D'Or. They put on a pretty good battle here. It looked like Anno D'Or was going to win this race for sure coming to the 8th pole because he had all the momentum built up, but 1,000 Words for Bob Baffert in just his second career start. This guy's a fighter. I mean, he showed some fight in his debut to win by a half a length, and the same thing here. He was really game to come back on Anno D'Or and get the victory.
Yeah, he did, and he did it with a nice 115 speed figure after 114 in his debut. I did it while stretching out the 2 turns for the first time as it debuted at 6.5. So I thought it was a good effort. Anno D'Or ran very well to be second. Like you said, it looked like a winner turning for home, especially given that really long stretch at Los Al that they used for the thoroughbred meet. He did kind of confirm that Breeders' Cup juvenile figure, of which was pretty big for the horses. They had all the long shot winners had made a pretty big jump up there, but he kind of backed it up and ran a good race. And I think we have some good horses. I was a little disappointed when they drew this race. I remember thinking a month ago, well, the Breeders' Cup didn't tell us much about the Eclipse Award, but we got some big races coming up. But it seems like people don't really care too much because none of the horses that had a shot really entered any this weekend. So, I'm not sure what to make of them. I'll have to, that's one of, as I think you're a voter, as am I, we'll have to put some thought into who we're going to vote for 2-year-old. I remember you made a comment about the turf horses, and I was like, there's not enough big races. But after this weekend, I'm not so sure about that one. But in any case, good effort from the top 2. Even High Velocity ran pretty well, I thought. I mean, he set a pretty fast pace before fading late. Not sure he wants to go much further, but for a short field, I thought they ran okay.
Yeah, maybe in the future we could do a podcast one of these weeks talking about some of those Eclipse Award decisions in greater depth. I think if you are somebody who's considering voting for Storm the Court, Anno D'Or's performance is not going to convince you not to do that because he ran pretty well in this race, as you were saying. And this is one of the fastest route races that we've seen the 2-year-olds run this year. So I think the top 2 are pretty nice horses, and I'm looking forward to how they progress as 3-year-olds. We saw a similar thing go on in the Starlet, where the 2 horses coming out of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, they really validated the form of that race as the 2nd and 3rd place finishers that day were the 1st and 2nd place finishers here in reversed order. Bast beating her rival Donna Veloce. The pace of this race was a little interesting because they really slowed it down towards the midsection of the race. They went a similar opening quarter to the Futurity, but they really slowed it down in the middle of the race and just kind of sprinted home. It was a match race, though. These 2 just dominated.
Yeah, it was a match race on paper, and much like the Cigar, it played out exactly that way. I thought Bass was really game. She kind of confirmed what a lot of us thought, that she might have even been best in the juvenile fillies. She just had a really rough trip that day from a pace perspective. And also, if I remember right, she took some kickback. But I thought she ran well. She got a 106, which is one of her best races so far. It may be her best speed figure. I can't remember what she got on her big figure back in October, but she ran very well, as did Donna Veloce. There are a couple promising fillies, but I want to see them get in against bigger fields where they actually have to do some running and some maneuvering. So it is a little bit tough to put a lot of stock in these 4 and 5 horse fields when you overmatch the others. The speed figures should be a little higher than you'll get in, say, a 10 horse field or even an 8 horse field, but not to take anything away. These are a couple nice fillies, and they will be a force in the division next year.
Yeah, and I think this race illustrates why it's okay to get a little bit excited about a horse like Lake Avenue, because she's running just as fast as these horses that ran in the Breeders' Cup. And we just haven't seen that many of the 2-year-old fillies achieving faster speed figures yet this year, whereas the Colts have run faster so far. We'll talk about a horse at the end of this podcast that might have surpassed them all, but not in a route race. Final race we'll talk about from Los Alamitos was an allowance race they ran on Saturday. Not 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, but an impressive lightly raced horse. Speed Pass for Bob Baffert, making his 2nd career start, one going 6 furlongs. And I really like the way this horse levels off in the lane and runs away from this field. This looks like an exciting sprinter.
Yeah, he does. He got a very nice speed figure for the win. He wound up with a 114 after winning his debut with a 104. But he did it as easy as can be. What I do like is that he's not doing it on the lead. He's a horse who's able to sit just off the pace and make that late run and finish strong. As you said, he does look like a sprinter to me, so I don't think he'd go much longer. My one reservation is it is late in the year and he's just making his second start. But so he obviously had some issues, but if he keeps showing up in the entry box, I think things have been straightened out. And he certainly looks like a promising colt in a division that is finished up the year at least pretty weak out in Southern California.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit too quick for Bob Baffert to run him back in a race like the Malibu in just 3 weeks, especially given that he needed almost 3 months between his first two starts. But he's one that I would look for over the winter because, as you said, we haven't seen that much power among the 3-year-olds below that top level of route horses. So we'll see who runs in these races over the winter. But he looks like one that you might look forward to stepping up into stakes company very soon. Let's move on to Gulfstream and discuss a couple of those Claiming Crown races that they ran on Saturday. The Claiming Crown Jewel was the feature race on that card, which we talked a little bit about on the forecast last week. Laytone looked like the top contender coming into that race. The big question for Laytone was, could he handle a much more intense pace situation? Because it looked like there were a lot of front runners in that field. He ended up stalking the pace, but the pace was just as fast as we expected it to be. He just kept going, though. The race totally fell apart behind him, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for holding on to win the race.
Yeah, I agree. He's a horse that came in with a big speed figure edge. He had run 121 last time out. He didn't quite run that fast this time. He ran a 113, but I was actually just as impressed. For one, that he was able to raid off that fast pace. He's a horse who's been more up, likened to be right on the lead, usually in the clear. So I thought it was pretty impressive. And as you said, if you look at the 3 horses that finished behind him, they were well back in the field. So he definitely put all the other speeds away and just ran it was a big effort. So I'm not going to knock the slight regression in speed figures. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is a horse that takes a shot in stakes races. I'm not talking about grade 1s or anything like that, but I'd give him a shot in nice listed stakes or even a grade 3.
I agree with that. I mean, we talked about it before, despite the fact that he was running in some cheap races, he's earning speed figures that say he should be competing in some graded stakes races. So I wouldn't be surprised because we've seen Jason Service pull this off before. We just talked about Happy Farm coming out of some similar lower level claiming races, and he's now a graded stakes winner. So I wouldn't put it past him to do it with Laytone as well. But I agree about the dynamics of this race. I think this horse deserves probably even more credit than that 113 TimeformUS speed figure might give him because this pace really did fall apart. The other Claiming Crown race we're going to discuss was the Canterbury, going 5 furlongs on the turf. Familiar name was the winner of this race, that being Shecky Shabazz, who actually competed in the Breeders' Cup. No surprise he was the 1-5 favorite in this race because he just kind of towered over the field based on form. Got the job done. Not his most impressive victory by any stretch, but he always looked like a winner.
He did. I mean, he was 1-5. He ran like he was 1-5. He had a nice effort in that Breeders' Cup turf sprint and backed it up. And he's just been another in the Jason Service barn that after the claim, or I don't remember if he was a claim or a private acquisition, but he's one of the top turf sprinters around. One of the things I found really eye-popping was the fractions of these races, which are just crazy. I haven't had a chance to go time them, but figure-wise, they line up for this and for the other races. I think we're going to talk about another one from Friday here in a minute, but I mean, I had a sub 43 half mile. So the course is obviously very firm if those times are right. But in any case, the fig is legit. I mean, it lined up for all the horses in here. So he's a good turf sprinter, doesn't show any signs of slowing down. And I imagine we'll see some more of him at Gulfstream this winter.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised these turf courses were only rated a 9 on the 1 to 10 scale. It's hard to think that the Gulfstream Park turf courses could get even faster than this, but I know they do get pretty hard during the wintertime when there's not a lot of rain. We'll stick with those 5 furlong turf sprints, though, and actually discuss a race from Friday that we had going a little bit faster. Very similar situation, running 54 and change. Carataria just continues to improve. He's a 3-year-old who actually set a track record going the 5.5 furlongs at Saratoga over the summer. This was his first victory since then, but he got back to that kind of performance and even improved on it a bit to beat this allowance field.
Yeah, when he's right, he's one quick one. He got a nice 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which is obviously even better than what Shecky Shabazz ran. Obviously, it's against a little bit lesser competition, but the horse who was a runner-up was coming in off a couple nice wins, hadn't run since May on the synthetic, but Explorationist had been a very promising horse, and he got a 117 as a runner-up after setting the pace. So, I think this is going to prove to be a very strong race. And that these horses will back up the speed figure they earned.
Yeah, I agree with that. The runner-up's an intriguing horse from Mark Cassidy. I believe he was almost cost $1 million. I believe as a 2-year-old purchase. He's out of a very good dam, Assateague, who was a graded stakes winner on the turf. So these top two could both be nice runners. They both showed a lot of speed this day and finished off the race well. So interesting to see if they move up into stakes company soon, because Caratari has certainly earned stakes-worthy speed figures in the past. One more race to discuss from Gulfstream, that occurring on Sunday's card. We're not going to discuss any of those Caribbean Classic races, but earlier on the card for the American-bred horses, Epic Dreamer returned in a sprint race. Now, he had come back because he had a layoff after trying to make the Derby earlier in the spring, but he came back at Parks in a couple of route races. Just didn't really get back to his top form. This was actually the first time he was cutting back to a sprint since his career debut at Belmont over a year ago when he was a 2-year-old. And that day, in his only prior sprint effort, he had finished second to Vekoma in a 6-furlong race that went in 108 and change. For whatever reason, they never sprinted him since then, but maybe he just is a sprinter.
Yeah, there's a good chance of that. He's going to get about a 114 Timeform US speed figure for this effort. I don't have the official number. I was working on those this morning. Got a few gray hairs doing those classic Carib races. Those are a nightmare for me, but we'll see what shows up. But I thought he ran well. He wasn't beating much, but I'm with you. If I was going to see him back, I'd want to see him try a sprint again. He's proven he's probably not a horse that wants a route, so why not? He looked good, and who knows, maybe he's found a new lease on life around one turn.
You better get some of those speed figures right, Craig, because a couple of them are actually going to stay in the U.S. and run again, so we'll be hearing more from them.
Yeah, maybe in the Pegasus like last year.
Yeah, we'll see. Good luck to them. Yeah, but I agree about what you said about Epic Dreamer. Maybe he might just be a sprinter. He's got to run a little bit faster to be competitive in stakes races, because the 114, it's not really a graded stakes type of number, but I liked the way he did it. His ears were pricked crossing the wire, seemed like he had something left in the tank. So he's one that I would look forward to down the line, because I did think he was a very talented younger horse, just maybe one that was targeted at the wrong spots for a little bit. One more race to discuss on this podcast, that being a race that we mentioned earlier on at Laurel. They ran some Maryland state-bred races last Saturday, and the Maryland Juvenile Filly Championship, going the 7 furlongs for 2-year-old fillies, was won in very impressive fashion by Hello Beautiful, one of 2 favorites coming into the race, the other being Miss J. McKay, who's really more of a turf horse. But Hello Beautiful, when she gets a clear lead in the dirt sprint, she's pretty hard to pass, and she just ran away from this group in the late, and the Timeform speed figure that she earned is pretty much off the charts for a 2-year-old Maryland bred.
Yeah, 117, which is just insane. And it's not like there wasn't much to go by. There were several other stakes races on the day. There was a 2-year-old male race just either right before it or right after it. Race we talked about on the forecast, the Howard and Sandra Bender Memorial for old seasoned veteran sprinters like Taco Supreme and actually your horse, who you picked that day one, who's at Lewisfield. Got back into good form and ran his good race. So she clearly, it was not a fluke. She is one fast filly. Her running lines kind of, to an extent, remind me of Extra Heat, where she broke her maiden into maiden claimer. She didn't do it first time out, but she's been nothing but impressive in her dirt races. And this one, if you watch it, it's hard to argue with the speed figure. I made the speed figure before I actually watched the race. But then I went back to check it out, and I was like, yeah, that looked like a 117 to me. So I'm not sure how far she wants to go, but she certainly is a filly who looks like she could be a really top sprinter.
Yeah, her pedigree is pretty obscure. I don't know a whole lot about her sire, Golden Lad. I'm actually having trouble recalling who he is as a racehorse, but we'll see how far she's bred to go. I think there's a little bit of stamina on the dam side, but she's just a good sprinter. As you were saying, they had tried her on turf a couple of times, but her dirt races, especially the ones where she's able to make the lead, she's just looked great. And this was obviously the best that she's done yet, but if she can maintain this kind of form, she's going to be on to some bigger and better things and some much tougher races, because this is really as fast as you're going to see a 2-year-old filly run at this time of the year. And the runner-up, Miss J. McKay, I mentioned that she was a turf horse. She can handle the dirt as well. So, I mean, I think she does validate that big speed figure by finishing second here. I assume they'll go back to turf with her in the future, but these are 2 very nice horses, just a big gap between them on this day.
Yeah, no doubt. One other horse I wanted to mention, just because it's a race I was working on this morning, I didn't get a chance to tell you about it, is check out the turf win for by Melvin at Tampa. I think he's trained by Graham Motion. The figure came back huge, a 119. It's a tough figure to make, so I'm going back doing some work. I don't think that 119 is going to hold up, but it's a very impressive performance nonetheless. When you watch this horse fly through the lane, I think he's a very good one. So take some time and check that one out.
I actually watched that race and was considering sending it in before ultimately deciding not to because we had a lot of other races to discuss. I did watch it from Tampa and was really impressed by it. I just didn't send it in because once I looked at the field that he was facing, not the strongest maiden special weight field in the world. So that big figure might be hard to justify for the other horses in the race. But Bye Melvin is out of that grade 1 winner, Karlovy Vary, a really nice pedigree for the Campbells. And he could be a nice horse. I don't know where that performance came from because he had run on the turf prior to that and had showed basically nothing. But sometimes these 2-year-olds can just turn it around very quickly. He certainly looked good in that race at Tampa last week. So I agree that's a replay to check out because he might be one to follow in the future. Well, Craig, that's all the racing to discuss for this week. We'll be back again next week to discuss some of these lower level races. Maybe we'll do that Eclipse Award discussion at some point. I think it's a little while before we get to another top level graded stakes race on the calendar nationally, but we'll continue with these podcasts. And we'll be back again on Friday, of course, with the TimeformUS Forecast. You can listen to both of those podcasts, as always, on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form and check us out. Thanks for listening this week, guys, and we'll talk to you again on Friday.